All right, let's talk about Fire Blight Management 2026. We're going to go through most of the basics so that when we get to the forecasts, you'll know what to do. We're going to stop this first video right around bloom. That'll get us through bloom. And then we'll talk about what to do after bloom once we hit the post-bloom period. Everywhere in the eastern United States, part of the Midwest and Wisconsin area, it's probably somewhere between half-inch green to pink approaching bloom. All the better to talk about this now. Your fire blight tends to begin with early on, as soon as you can, and if you can identify them in the spring, prune them out. 1 to 2 applications of copper. Around this time, the cankers in the orchard will begin to ooze if we get warm weather, and we did have some 70 and 80 degree days. A lot of opportunity for oozing cankers. That could have been smushed by 1 to 2 coppers. You can generally get in 2 coppers, sometimes 3, if you're doing things efficiently and you have a prolonged period, and that'll just really knock down that fire blight inoculum. Once we start moving into the pink period, once the flower clusters fully separate and are showing some pink tissue, you're right at that pre-bloom period. Sometimes you can put on some prohexadienol calcium there to kind of like thicken up those pedicel walls in case they get infected. And then earlier around the pink or king bloom, you can start to put on your systemic acquired resistance inducers. Right there's some options where the two are combined, and we'll talk about that. And then once you get into the full bloom period, that's when you really want to put on your antibiotics and your biologicals to get the populations that are on the flowers, hopefully to avoid this sort of nonsense. Blossom blight, and then the worst part, shoot blight. And then if you're really going for the organic approach, same type of thing. Prune out copper. You're going to have a couple options for natural systemic acquired resistance inducers. And unlike apple scab, I think you have better options for managing fire blight with biologicals and avoiding these 2 bad things there. So what can we say about fire blight? It's becoming increasingly more problematic. We've not beaten it. It's been around for more than 200 years, sad to say. And it's getting harder. And a couple things help. A couple things make it more challenging. High density, tall spindle, super spindle plantings, 1,000, 1,200 trees to the acre make our acreage very high value, but that's the best for production and the best for getting good spray coverage and disease management. However, the trees are really small and can be wiped out easily by fire blight. Not to mention, each tree costs a lot of money, and when you have that many in your acre, things get very dark quickly. If you have younger trees, their bloom can be a little protracted, and their tissue could be a little more vigorous as we're pushing them to reach that top wire as we want them to get established, and those can get wiped out a little more easily, particularly if you get a protracted bloom. They will begin to bloom a little later in the season when it tends to be hotter. We got resistant rootstocks. They're great. They're really great for me doing trials where I infect my trees every year, and it doesn't matter how devastated they get. As long as I can get a couple of shoots and flowers, I can keep going. Unfortunately, once that fire blight sits that central leader and it's a high density tree, it's not really worth keeping. Only I will keep these fire blight bushes, we'll call them, because I can do trials in them. The tree is just, in terms of making fruit, it's just a waste of time. I would get it out of there and move it on. And almost everything we like to eat or we want to store, it looks pretty and tastes super sugary for our sugar motivated consumers, just gets fire blight like crazy. And then, of course, we got all these really nasty weather. We're getting a little bit of warmer weather. We just had warmer weather before petal fall. And then the one where it gets really scary is when we have cold blooms, which we're moving into a colder bloom. And then we get a real nasty hot burst from petal fall to terminal bud set. That thinning weather, if it gets really hot, that's going to be troublesome for fire blight. What are our different phases? We got blossom blight. It's sort of starts everything out. All the ooze on the cankers flies over, lands on the stigmatic surface in wet weather or some kind of pollinator lands there. Gets on the stigma, moves down into the floral cup, causes systemic infection. Looks kind of like that. In years where the infection isn't so intense, it may look more like a naturally thinned flower, and you just have to give it a tug to see if it falls off. And if it doesn't fall off, you've got a little bit of fire blight in there that could get crazy later on with shoot blight. How do we beat it? A lot of options. This is one of the easier stages to manage fire blight. You can do fairly well unless you're in a tropical environment. A lot of antimicrobials, plant defense, plant growth regulators, plant defense inducers can do these. A lot of the antimicrobials will be your strongest tools. And there are some competitive products that are absolutely fantastic. Shoot blight will really knock out your bearing wood. They'll lead to these systemic infections and can cause a tree mortality very quickly in a week or so, particularly in a small high density tree if you have hot 80 and 70 degree, high 70 degree weather. We've already had some of that. Let's hope we don't get any more until everything sets the terminal bud. I suspect we'll have hot weather at some point. And the best thing you can do for this is do a little bit of pruning and the fence inducers, but the PGRs, peroxidinal calcium, and some of the fence inducers are particularly strong in that. Rootstock blight is very sad, particularly if your rootstock suckers get infected. And this is where your resistant rootstocks shine. If they start to sucker due to other sources of stress, they can get a fire blight and kill the whole tree pretty quickly. But you can get away with that. And the trauma blight is when we finally have developed tissue, still actively growing shoots, and hail, wind, and animals come rampaging through the planting and tearing things up. You can do antibiotics or copper for this. If you can keep the fruit, you tend to go antibiotics. If you can't keep the fruit because they're just barked up anyway, just copper it out to save the crop. So some basics for fire blight. We've already talked about the cycle before. We'll go through it again. Cankers, large oozing cankers. So in the spring, they'll start to push, particularly when you have hot weather like we've had already 70 and 80 degree days before bloom. This is going to get the cankers running. They're going to ooze. It's going to kind of look like your apple tree is making syrup. It's not syrup. Well, it is a syrup, but it's not the one you want. It could be a fire blight syrup. And this will fly over, land in wind-blown rain or some pollinator visiting it. Any creatures love this because it's sweet. The bacterial ooze is sweet. That's why they like it, particularly flies. It's going to get on that stigmatic surface and it'll multiply on the sugars on the stigma, wash into the floral cup, and infect through the nectaries, causes an invasion of the blossom tissue, and this is why we're putting the prohexadiol calcium on at this point, because we want to thicken those cell walls up there to lock the bacteria from this invasion stage. So yeah, your flowers might die, but you don't get that nasty invasion where the fire blight then begins to ride through your shoot tissue like a water slide. And, of course, it will move through towards the actively growing tissues, and if it just gets so full of bacteria, it'll burst out, making an ooze droplet, and then various other creatures will come grab it, particularly insects and flies, sweet ooze, and they'll bring it. And it doesn't take a lot of wound. Any slight bumping together, any just insect feeding, rubbing, scratching can be enough of an ooze, enough of a wound for this fire blight to get back in and travel, even coming out of your fruit, and lead to the large systemic infections of shoot tissue, which then eventually turn to cankers the next year. So the best way to get a handle on fire blight right off the bat is take down that inoculum. And this sort of illustrates an example of one might achieve fire blight inoculum, fire blight incidence in your planting in terms of, we'll say, blossom blight. Or it could be shoot blight going from 0 to 100%. You do nothing. And in a bad year, this thing could just wipe out the entire tree. I've seen it happen in quite some time. But if you do some of that sanitation and pruning, get rid of the old material, and it's not the oldest dead cankers that are going to cause you trouble, it's the margins on living tissue, and that will get the material going. But if you take that out, it's kind of like taking this very fast developing curve that goes up to 100 and just keep pushing it. You want to get to the terminal bud set when the plant stops growing, because fire blight can't do much at that point. But if you put down the copper, wham, it's like taking this inoculum and dropping it, pushing that curve there so that by the time it gets there with just a copper application, you're like, oh, great, 70%. That's much better than 100. And maybe the idea being that if you do the sanitation and the copper, we can move this curve so close to terminal bud set, you don't even need to worry about it. And then, of course, the thing that really can knock down the inoculum, that sort of initial infection, is stopping that primary infection right there. I can really take that curve and just get rid of it. And that's why we do all the stuff at bloom in that particular instance. It's really just pushing that curve out the window and you don't even have to worry about it. But what about later? What are the things that you do here when you're putting on PGRs to stop this invasion? You're putting on defense inducers. These all work on the inside of the plant or in the plant's physiology. They're like giving the tree a lot of echinacea to kind of fight off infections. If we could inject our trees with antibiotics like we take antibiotics for our own bacterial infections, we'd be doing great. But injecting thousands of trees in an acre is just really not a feasible option. So that's why we use these defense inducers, plant growth regulators, and kind of pruning. And this will take this inoculum here that can build up cycles very quickly as the bacteria moves through the crop and bursts out, and will then just sort of flatten what it seems to be a very high, quick rise to 100% shoot blight in this particular instance. And it'll just sort of flatten it right there. So if you have some antibiotics, biologicals bloom, they're going to do a little bit of flattening as well, because they're going to sort of slow down. If these types of things ooze, they're going to slow down the cycle where it like, oh, that oozes, and it'll reinfect the next time. And then it might even flatten that curve just a little bit more once you start putting on the SARs, the PGRs, and the pruning, getting that down to harvest. And then finally, the full season program with everything will flatten it. So if you do the early inoculum reduction, you've already pushed the curve there. And then if you do all the PGRs and pruning, you're taking away its ability to quickly ramp up disease with a lot of cycles of infection oozing, or picking up again with a creature, and oozing infection again. And then that's kind of how we end up beating the whole disease together. So what else can we do? Implement the best horticultural practices. The best thing to use is less susceptible cultivars. There's not a lot of single gene resistance in popular cultivars. The Geneva rootstocks are great for avoiding that nasty rootstock blight, and the B9 as well in the second year. However, once you have a small tree like this, you're probably better off not keeping it. And the only reason I keep it is to do fire blight trials year after year. I don't keep ones that look like that. Even I throw those away. But I can't replant as easily because there's a lot of administrative barriers to replanting on Cornell campus. And so I kind of have to keep my junk. But you don't. You can pull this off. There's no overlord telling you you can't replant that tree. Once it hits that central leader, pop that thing out of there and get rid of it. And then if in the colder areas of the year that don't already have bloom, this is a good opportunity to go in there and take a look and see which of your shoots aren't putting out any leaf tissue or leaf buds. Like, oh, you know what? There's a fire blight canker. Prune it out. You can prune out your strikes and get rid of that stuff. If it was dead of winter, you can leave them to dry out. They are great. Fire blight cannot withstand drying, but it can withstand cold. So if this stuff dries out and the tissue quits living and dries up, the fire blight can't go anywhere. When it starts to dry up, it's almost as if like it's not growing. Well, it isn't growing. And then it can't continue to invade the tissue. So it kind of just gets locked up and walled off. It's not going to ooze on the ground drying up and splash up into the tree. That's off the table. And then if it's really bad, you can just run through with a chainsaw and cut them all off at the trunk and let them hang on the wire and dry out. That'll slow the fire blight down as well. And this is what it might look like in the dead of winter. And this is what it looked like probably in the fall. And you can kind of see, just let that stuff dry there. And once it's dry there, you can sweep it up or just grind it under your tractor. And maybe take some satisfaction in crushing the fire blight infected shoots under your tractor tires. Don't puncture them though. Pre-season scout, prune out the large oozing cankers. You got something like this. It's great. It's really easy to see. And there it is, kind of oozing, looking like it's making you syrup. I mean, I wouldn't eat it. It ain't gonna hurt you. But it's just kind of gross. But it probably is very sweet. And you can't really do much with this. In this case, you think, how bad is that gonna be? I think in this case, I wouldn't pull up my tree. I think I'd just make sure I did my dormant copper. And this is probably what someone did and just killed it all out right there. The problem is with the small cankers, old blossom blight, old shoot infection, summer pruning cuts that look a little shrunken at the ends are kind of just too hard to identify and see and cut them all out. Now you can begin to see them a little more easily because you'll be like, hey, that shoot doesn't making anything and there's a canker on it and it's not green. Bam, I'm going to cut that thing out. And then at this point, you've already sort of passed this. This is why I was pushing the dormant copper for apple scab, because all that silver tip copper all that silver tipped half-inch grain copper, big thick coppers come in there and they can just wipe those cankers out that are oozing. And then, the warm weather will make the cankers ooze, fire blight inoculum goes up, but you come in and you hit it hard with that copper for scab a couple times, and anything that oozed over the last couple weeks will be kind of dead. Now as we're moving into pink and tight cluster, it's where we recommend early peroxide calcium. If you're doing it by yourself, about 6 ounces per 100 gallon. Tight cluster will give you more blossom blight protection. Pink will give you a little more shoot blight protection. Or you can do the 2+1, which is a very popular combination, 2 ounces of the Prohex and 1 ounce of acylbenzolar S-methyl or Actigard. Put these two together. It can be expensive, this one. That's why we do 2 plus 1. And that tends to work as well as this and doesn't slow the tree down. And you get a little bit, in this case, 2 plus 1 equals 4, because them working together gives you a little more control than either of them by themselves. Then thicken the pedestal cell walls. That's what this little piece is there. They stop there. Bacterium tries to come in there and infect. It has little tiny micro straw that it tries to use to inject its, we'll call it pathogenicity factors that cause it to go crazy. And cell wall's too thick, it can't do it, it can't invade. And then guess what? Dries up and dies. And that's why we start these defense inducers and these PGRs of paint. So, your organic, same thing. Copper's great. Your best bet at this time is Regalia Lifeguard application. And we don't often have Bloom Time Live, but I'm already putting it in the talks to get people excited about it. That King Bloom, I'd go on there now. These two are competitive microbes that will lock out the fire blight populations. So, maybe put on right on my King Bloom, bop, hit that on there. And that moves us into the bloom season. In all cases, use your consultant, your local extension alerts, or any disease model forecasts if you want to run them yourselves. It's entirely possible. And it'll tell you. They're going to predict tons of infections throughout the year, but sort of watch and see which infections are the biggest and longest and ones that you really need to focus on. You shouldn't need any more than 3 applications to get to petal fall, and maybe a little past petal fall when all the applications die down. And it tends to, if I get one well-timed application on there, I can keep the fire blight off the flowers because I can culture it and look at it in the lab. It's like, yep, still gone. One well-timed application will get almost all of your inoculum, and even in really hot years, the models are going to tell you it recovered again in less than 3 days. But when I pull those flowers off and look at them, they're looking pretty clean, even a week or 2 later. And so that one well-timed application can do it. In every case, always use model plus common sense. How else are we going to get through this? Here's some of the different models that the NUA has. It's got the Cougar Blight updated WSU model. It's a fantastic model. But if you're feeling regionalist, you can always just focus just on the epiphytic infection potential, which is based on the Mary Blight model out of University of Maryland in West Virginia. Both of them great models. I use them both, and none of them have ever steered me wrong. Scientific evidence suggests that if you use them to plan your fire blight applications, they both will do a fantastic job of controlling. And they get sort of integrated with the weather, the NUA system and the NRCC weather data so that you don't have to have a station on your farm. But if you do, you tend to get better data. Fully automated, all you have to do is put in the bloom date. And if you can't do that, it will guess for you based on historical averages. And then you can find it here, nua.cornell.edu fire blight. Click on the link. And here are some thresholds I say. Usually about 100 or more streptomycin, kasugamycin. If you're looking at EIPs, and you can see in this particular chart, we're already at 120. I would definitely go in the antibiotic this week. It's a pretty intense week in this funny example on the side. Use oxytetracycline or a biological. And then moving into, to get us the rest of the way bloom, if you don't have strep resistance, it's probably still one of the best materials. It's the easiest to use. It allows you to be a little more sloppy than the other biologicals. And if you won't have to try as hard with this one. It'll work 24 ounces an acre. Or that is for the 17%. If you have a 50%, it's going to be about 8. And then if you can, get a different antibiotic in afterwards. You're trying to preserve these antibiotics forever. Kasugamycin is a great option. Just use it on a cloudier day. Don't use it in the middle of the sun. Or if you're going to use it on a sunny day, do it right at night when the population surge and this doesn't break down in the sunlight. Use it for the 2nd or 3rd forecast infection. Now, if you're organic, and you can still do this even if you're conventional, can't have antibiotics. Blossom Protect is probably one of the strongest options out there. It's a great material, but this organism can cause fruit russet. Not during bloom, but later after all the petals have fallen off the tree. And only on varieties that are very sensitive. Bloom Time Live, Pantoia, Glomerans, it's like a natural both. This is like a normal epiphyte that can outcompete the fire blight bacterium on the apple flower. It's already there in high numbers, and what you're doing here is you're just taking a natural competitor and putting it on and just really boosting that up. I just really put these on maybe about 60 EIP to give them a little bit of time to build up maybe a day or two than you would normally. And right before that wet weather, always use local data. And if it washes a lot, you could pull them off. But this thing grows like crazy, and this will just keep being high levels, even if they do wash off. But I, reapply for 7 days. Of course, watch me kick us out of the full screen mode. And then I'm gonna stop at that point, and that's sort of what we're gonna leave it a bloom. We'll come back and do post bloom fire blight management later, and we'll talk about it. All right.